The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses and nonprofits better manage the employee experience by providing the tools, training, and resources they need to take the organization to the next level. To learn more, go to our website, team@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, management and HR consultants Chuck Samikian and John Tallheimer dive into the stories that matter to small business owners, nonprofit leaders, and HR professionals. We continue to be amazed at how many companies allow poor decision-making, lack of knowledge, or in some cases, hubris to cause harm to their organization. Each week, we discuss stories where companies must pay large fines, lose great talent, and even stain their reputation within their community. And we tell you how to avoid the same fate. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. And this week's episode, John and Chuck will talk about sickness at work and how it impacts everyone, including your customers. Hi, what's going on, Chuck?
Oh, absolutely. I love talking about sickness and health. And this sounds like a great story today. John, I just want to shout out to our listeners. We've hit over 10,000 downloads. We're increasing our listenership and some of our viewership week after week. Folks, if you like what's going on with the HR Stories podcast, we'd love for you to support us. If you could comment, subscribe. Many of you, over 65%, I think, are listening on Apple Podcasts. So there's a way for you to at least give us some thumbs up, some stars, some ratings. That really helps us out. Any other ways, John, that you could think of for the folks to support us?
I'm sorry, I'm chasing a spider. No, I think the things is this, listen, of course we want to hear your accolades. We want to hear what we're doing well. We want to hear what we're not doing well. But the reason we ask you this is because the more we get highly rated, the more then that Apple will push it up. And that way more people can see it, it becomes visible to more people. And we're really passionate about making sure companies are getting HR right. And so the more people we reach, the more we're fulfilling our mission of helping companies, small businesses, big companies get HR right. And so we're really passionate about that. So I think that really is the kind of the big thing that we're trying to do here.
Right. And also, John, we're going to start an ability for our listeners to perhaps support the show on a monthly basis. And folks, look for that and those links and us to talk a little bit about that later, just to kind of help defray some costs and keep the HR stories flowing.
Flowing, oh my goodness. Who writes your material? I think you need a new writer. All right, so Chuck, what's happening in the HR news?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of neat things going on. There's all kind of HR news. And so there's never a shortage of companies that are not getting HR right that could probably use our book, The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklists. And folks, if you're interested in that, it's hrchecklist.com. Little plug there. But so there's no shortage of that. But there are some really cool landmarks, timelines coming up over the next couple of weeks and months. And one of the neat things is the Equal Pay Act. That is hitting 60 years old this summer. And the EEOC is commemorating that 60th anniversary through a variety of outreaches. So I just wanted to share one of those for our listeners.
Oh, great. I want to hear more about it. I did see that was happening now 60 years. And I think, let me go back. I'm trying to get my statistics in here. I think in 1960, when the average male worker was making $1, the average female was making about 60 cents. In 2022, when a male worker was making $1, the average female worker was then making $83.07.7. 83 cents. Sorry, 83 cents,
Yeah.
83.7 cents. So we're getting better, still not there, right? Still many areas that's there, right? And that's just averages that we can go into industry and race and that kind of stuff, but just something to there. So
Yeah, and the gap is closing. And just so our listeners know, just a quick refresher, the Equal Pay Act of 1963 prohibited sex-based wage discrimination and requires that men and women working in the same establishment receive equal pay for equal work. So if you want to participate in some of these outrages, the EEOC is creating this campaign called Level the Paying Field. I kind of like that. It's a playoff level the playing field. We're going to level the paying field. And the graphic is kind of cool. It has it's green. I guess it has kind of a feel for grass, so like a playing field. Yeah. So anyways, I was taken by that, but this is kind of cool. What they want to do is they've got graphics you can download, and they want to invite people that have been affected by the Equal Pay Act, either positively or believe in it wholeheartedly, to add social media reels. And they said, you know what? Go ahead, take some of our graphics, do a 30 to 60 second reel. It could include, tell viewers why the equal pay for equal work is important to you. Remind your followers you can contact the EEOC if you suspect you're not getting paid equal pay for equal work. And remember to add hashtag level the paying field. So it's kind of neat. There are graphic size graphics for Twitter, graphic size for Instagram, graphic GIF videos, and you can download them all. Folks, we'll have that on in the show notes below. I got to make sure when I say that, I actually give that link to Samantha, our producer, so she doesn't have to search for it.
Samantha, did you get that? Yeah, she got it. She's like, okay, I'll take a note, make sure Chuck does what he said he was going to do.
Sure.
Going on there. So that's good. Well, I mean, it's interesting because one of the things that I was looking at was the unemployment numbers for May. I don't know if you remember, the unemployment figures came out and the unemployment rate increased by 0.3% to 3.7% in May. But we had the payroll, non-farm payroll employment increased by 339,000 in May. And so unemployment rate rose by 0.3, so we're at 3.7%, which is pretty impressive if you think about where we were a couple years ago. Unemployment was going up to 5, maybe 6. And now it's down at 3.7, which is a low unemployment rate. It's a low unemployment rate. And so when you kind of look at some of the details, I was looking to see if I could figure out, and I don't have that figures in here, male versus female, but in some of these industries, what we found was, and where's the one I was looking for? The leisure and hospitality industry, right? Which is always the one. Really, I think, I'm not going to say a canary in the coal mine, but they are the ones that are much, what's the word? They adjust fast, right? And so typically we'll see, what does that mean to the rest of the economy? And they largely in food service and drinking places, they added 33,000 in the leisure and hospitality. So an average of 77,000 jobs per month over the past prior 12 months. Employment in this industry remains below its February 2020 level by 349,000. So it's still low. And I think one of the things that makes it so low is they're having a hard time filling their jobs, right? And so when we look at the hospitality industry in particular, there's a lot of openings there. It's time for the listener question, or Ask John and Chuck, or Chuck and John. I'm not sure if we've really named this segment yet, but we've just started doing this podcast, listeners. And so here's the question of the week. Chuck, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. How would you go about addressing an anonymous email that was received through our general inquiry line and accusing an employee of stealing. Would you discuss this with the employee being accused first? What would you do?
Wow. So it's an anonymous email. So I'm working, all of a sudden anonymous comes in, someone, maybe a Gmail account or something like that. And they said, you have an employee that's working for you that is stealing. Right.
Yes.
And, okay. Yeah, I'm always suspicious these days of phishing emails and things like that. So sometimes I get, your Microsoft Excel, your Microsoft package needs renewal,
Right.
or I get some weird things that have no links to them. They just say just crazy things, And so at first I would be suspicious, but I would at least, if they name the person, so I'm assuming they said John Smith or Joe Blow and whatever department is stealing and blah, blah, blah. So if they got a little more detailed, I think, okay, maybe there is something here. So now as I look down that flow chart, I think either A, it may be true, B, it may not be true. And this could be, I don't know, an ex-spouse. sorry, ex-spouses.
Yeah, I think in this case, as I remember the question, is that I think it was from another employee. So I will give you that context. I do think it was from another employee.
Okay.
So let's assume that it was from another employee, Chuck, and they just sent it through the anonymous tip line that Chuck Samikian is stealing stuff from the team at HR Stories.
Yeah. So then I would investigate it, John. Where there's smoke, there's fire. There may be possible smoke, but I wouldn't go right up to the employee and say, guess what? Someone just sent this message. I may not even go up to the manager right away. I would kind of get a lay of the land. I would definitely go to my boss and, cover myself and say, hey, I got this through. And then I would launch a slow but low investigation.
So what do you mean by low?
Okay. So a low investigation would not be where it would be along the lines of taking a look at what the context was, taking a look at the employee, taking a look at the fact, could this possibly happen? It would be getting facts straight, first of all. And then once I got the facts straight, low would be, I'm not going out, I'm not pulling in a bunch of folks. I let my boss know. I might let that manager's boss know also. Okay. But I would start with observations. I would start with some questions to maybe that person's boss. Say, what do you think of this? And I would start gathering information. That's kind of a low level investigation. And then if I saw something, then I might kick it into a little more higher gear, which means pulling that employee in. Like right now, we're not involving that employee. We're not putting them on alert yet. I'm just waiting to see if this is even possible. If there's any, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think all that's perfect. I would do the same thing. And I think it will depend on what they were stealing, right? And so, again, I think about when I worked at one corporation, we had a large jewelry vault, right? We had a large jewelry vault, and we would find out occasionally that employees were stealing jewelry from the jewelry vault, right? They found fascinating ways to do it, right? It was very fascinating. And so I would then go and look around, like, how is this possible? How would they do that? But it could also be they're stealing from, like they're moving numbers, right? Mm-hmm. They're taking numbers electronically and taking $100 and putting it in their account or something like that. And so going in and really getting the data is going to be key here to understanding that. And you may need somebody from the inside that would be able to explain it to you, right? So if I come in as HR and we're talking about the technical people moving money to one thing, I'm going to need a forensic accounting to do that, right? And so I think you may need help and support on this, but I do like the approach, like, this may not be true, and you don't want to start this big issue and put this person under suspicion if it's not true.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Great question.
Yeah, that's great. And so I love this segment. So ladies and gentlemen, please make sure that you do email. We'll put the link for the email in the question box. I mean, in the question box, in the notes. And just let us know what your questions are. We want to hear from you about what your challenges are. And maybe it's just a question, but maybe we'll develop a whole story around it. Because we got a great story today. I think it's time to take a break. What do you think, Chuck?
I think so. I just want to remind our folks about the HR Team of One community on Facebook. Folks, if you have a question, you can post it on there. We may choose that question also. And I know we have a lot of listeners from the HR Team of One community on Facebook. It's one that we sponsor, and it's free for you to join. So we'd love to have you join. And John, with that, let's skedaddle for a quick break. Hey everybody, it's Chuck with the team at HR Stories. The HR Stories podcast provides weekly lessons along with compelling HR news in a storytelling format. But we have found our listeners want more. You know, we know it's easy to be overwhelmed managing the day-to-day responsibilities of HR. We know HR can be isolating. And our listeners want a supportive community to turn to for advice and inspiration. And we've been there. We know what it's like. And that's why John and I at the team at HR Stories have created a membership program that goes beyond the HR Stories podcast. Imagine an education support group for new and experienced HR professionals alike, with twice monthly sessions and an opportunity to collaborate and network with your peers. Whether you are an HR team of one or you have HR as a responsibility, our membership program is designed to offer benefits that will elevate your knowledge and advance your career. Simply go to team@hrstories.com and click on the membership link in the top menu bar to learn more. Or check out the link in the show notes below.
Welcome back, listeners, to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. The lesson today is dealing with sickness in the workplace.
Yeah, John, you know, after COVID, you would think us HR folks and folks out in the HR field would be able to handle sickness at work.
Yeah, you would think, right? However, as we move past the emergency phase of COVID, dealing with worker sickness is coming up again, right? Being sick at work, it's coming up. It's becoming an issue again for a lot of companies.
Yeah, you know, it's hard for employees not to come to work if they aren't paid. That's
right. And that's yeah. And that's really what this story is about, right? Because I think when we think about our non-exempt employees, if they don't work,
yeah,
they don't get paid.
Exactly.
Right? But first, I want to read from the team at HR Stories policy manual, Chuck.
Ah, yes. Our policy manual. Absolutely.
Yeah. Our employee handbook, right? We got to have one at the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories recognizes that employees will occasionally need time off from work to recover from illness, address their medical needs, and address a family member's medical needs. For this purpose, regular full-time employees will accrue sick leave at a rate of 1 day per month. Sick leave may be used for the employee's own illness or for the care of a child, spouse, or domestic partner or parent. And it goes on. But you get the point, right? Having a sick leave policy is important, but if it doesn't address the issues, it could be challenging, right? And today I wanted to share a story about the impact sick workers can have on your business. Now, I want to be clear here. This story is an amalgamation of many stories from the news in my experience.
Yeah, so it's not a true story.
Well, it's a true story in the sense that it happened, but I embellished a little, changed things around to drive my point home.
Okay, so it is still an HR story where there is a lesson in every story, and as long as there's a lesson in this story, I say go for it.
All right, perfect. All right, so there is definitely a lesson in the story. So this happened near my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee last summer. So it was Julia's 12th birthday, and she was excited to eat at a real restaurant. Her family didn't get to go to restaurants very often unless it was a quick stop at a fast food restaurant. Her whole family was going to be there, including her favorite aunt. She almost jumped out of the car as she ran to the front door of the restaurant. Her family laughed behind her. The doorman opened the front door, and in front of Julie was this enchanted place, a large fish tank on one side where if she wanted to, she could pick the lobster she was going to eat, and on the other side was a bar filled with adult laughter. The hostess greeted them and then took them to a special room where they would celebrate her birthday. There were balloons in the corner, and Julie noticed her mom, after surveying the room, gave a large smile to the hostess and whispered the word perfect. Julie had the chance to sit at the head of the table.
Ah, I like that. You know, it reminds me when I was a kid, it wasn't fish and fish tank, but it was a place called Bimbo's. And it was a pizza place, and it was really special. And as a kid, they had this entertainment up there. They'd put you they made a big deal. You'd sit at the head of the table, and it's just fantastic. So I know that it's not Bimbo's, but it sounds much more upscale, John, because that's the way your stories are.
Yeah, it was a little more upscale than that, right? I mean, they had a hostess and that kind of stuff. So behind the wall where Julie sat was the sous chef, Henry. Henry stood between a hot stove and all the sauces. He felt like garbage. His fever was spiking, and his head was pounding. Earlier in the day, he had called his boss and told him that he had a fever. His boss had told him, Henry, if you don't come in tonight, don't bother coming in tomorrow. Henry focused on not vomiting on the plates in front of him. He remembered when he first started, the original manager had told him that if you're sick, have a fever, feel like vomiting, have diarrhea, do not come to work. However, the new manager didn't care. Julie ordered her favorite food, chicken parmesan and a milkshake. Her family ordered their dinners as well, and with most of the adults getting a glass of wine, except for her Aunt Betsy, who also ordered a milkshake. Henry pulled the 5 orders of chicken parmesan from the oven, sliding them on the individual plates with his fingers. His fever seemed to relent a little bit, but his nose was running. He felt as if he was going to vomit at any moment. He excused himself and went out to the back of the restaurant. Julie's food arrived, and she couldn't help but smile. It looked like it just did on the restaurant's website. Julie and her family were enjoying themselves, and afterward they were heading home to eat cake with her mom had made earlier in the day. While Julie was still enjoying her food, Henry was out back throwing up in the bushes. One of the dish staff shouted to him, "Bad night?" And he responded, "No, I have the flu." And the dish staff said, "Well, you shouldn't be here." No shit. tell the boss, Henry.
Okay.
Henry responded. Julie and her family enjoyed their dinner and headed home to open gifts and eat the cake. It was 3 a.m. in the morning when Julie knew something wasn't right. Her stomach hurt and she was hot. She cried out for her mom, who quickly realized that Julie had had sick food poisoning. In the end, the manager at the restaurant ended up receiving 23 calls from diners the night before who said they had gotten food poison from the restaurant. When the manager talked to the executive chef, the manager realized that the executive chef had let Henry work even though he was sick, which was not only against company policy, but against local county regulations. The next day, the executive chef was looking for a job.
Yeah, it is way, not just it is way against the law. And I got to tell you, I've worked in hotels, obviously restaurants. We've had situations where the health department will actually come in. And I'm not talking about food poisoning. I'm talking about if someone is sick, someone sees someone sick, someone reports the restaurant. There's folks that aren't feeling well, they go, and I can't remember, there's a hepatitis or something that they get, and it has to be reported to the local health department, and they will come in right away, and they will start, this is before COVID, folks, before contact tracing was a thing. So I know, John, based on my experience and a few other things, according to the CDC, 40% of foodborne illnesses in restaurants come from workers coming into work sick. And
Can you repeat that? You dropped out there a little
oh,
bit.
yeah, it comes from workers that are coming into work even though they are sick. So 40% of foodborne illnesses are as a result of that. And, in most cases, these workers don't feel like they can stay home. Either they're going to go lose their job, or if they call out sick, they won't be able to pay their bills. So it's a big problem, especially in that frontline food and beverage industry.
Yeah, and it's not just the restaurant industry, though, right? Employees being sick and work can have major impacts on businesses at all. We saw this often during COVID, where the results could have been death. However, the flu itself can reduce the workforce by up to 30 to 40%. I worked as a production manager at a theater company outside of Philadelphia, and I remember, I can still visually see this. I had an employee show up and he had 102, 104 fever. And we're like, no, you need to go home. Like, no, you got to go home. You can't be here. He was like, no, I can't go home, right? Because that old theater adage, well, the show's got to go on. And I just remember like him sitting in the back hallway, trying to get cool, right? Trying to find some way to get cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you, so you should have sent him home and you did not.
Yeah, absolutely.
So would you do it differently now?
Oh yeah, 100%, right? I was a first-time manager. I really was like, I did kind of need him there because his role was so important. Didn't really have anybody back trained. Wasn't sure if I was going to be comfortable with that. Didn't want to stop the show just because one of my employees was sick. However, today, there would be not a question. That person would not have come through the door. I would have sent him home.
Yeah. In the operational side of things, my theme park side, usually if a manager called in, everyone had to pick up the workload. So there was a peer pressure about not calling in sick. And sometimes you had some managers come in also. I remember I had a boss, Brett. I'm just going to say it, Brett. I remember that day you were sick as heck and you were like, I'm not calling in. He had every medication known to man, flu, sinuses, line up and he's coughing, sees his door is shut. He's like, but I'm going to be at work. And I'm thinking, dude, seriously, it in the end, it ultimately doesn't really matter. You call in sick, get better. I did read an interesting statistic, John, about a year or so ago. There was a study done where the remote workers felt that there was pressure, a little more pressure to work while sick because they were at home. And I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting.
They thought, so there was this thing where, oh, look, our sick days are going down. People must love coming to work or working. And then they did a little study and they find out the sick days are going down. The call-offs are going because people are working when they're sick because they're at home. So I thought that was interesting. But what should companies do? It's really, it is tough.
Yeah, and I think there is. So there's 7 things that you and I suggest to our clients when it comes to sick leave policy, right? There are 7 things that we recommend. The first one is have a generous paid sick leave policy if possible, right? And so the more generous you can be, the better you are. Kind of factor that into what you're going to be paying an employee, right? And so all right, so we're going to have to pay them 40 hours a week, but we're going to also give them 3 hours of sick time or vacation time or whatever, however you do it, kind of like personal time off myself so the employees can use it whatever they want. So that's number 1. Number 2 is advise all employees to stay home if they are sick. I will tell you, for me, that is probably the one thing that I am very strong on. Like, look, if you're sick, stay home. We don't want you to come to work because they're going to come in and impact other people as well. I would rather have them miss a couple of days and get better than come in and get everyone else sick. Employees who do get sick at work should go home immediately. Right? So if they do come in and they are sick, you should be sending them home. Again, right? That's where that tension between, well, if you send me home, I'm not going to get paid and I need to get paid. And so trying to figure that out also becomes good. Provide the necessary supplies to reduce sickness at work. Right? We know this from COVID, but tissues, soap, alcohol-based hand cleaners to encourage hand sanitations. So I don't know if I've told you this story. So Chuck, at one point when I worked at QVC, one of the teams that I was responsible for was the Studio Operations Center. And so we had people there. We had 3 people there 24/7, 364 days a year. And they used the same desk. And so we started this routine where if somebody got up from their desk and somebody was taking that over, they had to clean it, right? They had to go and squab it down and clean it. And at first, people were a little reluctant because they felt like, I'm saying to that person, I think you have germs and you're sick, right? And after a while, I think people saw the benefit of it. And I say it reduced our sickness by about 30%. Because we weren't passing it back and forth. Yeah. And so encourage employees to get the flu and COVID vaccinations, right? Reduce the amount of work they're going to be out. Clean all high touch surfaces as much as possible. The big one for me is the copier, right? Because that's where everyone goes and touches, right? The cafeteria, the break rooms. Somebody should be doing that on a regular basis. And that's more than once a day, kind of going in there. And then finally, make sure everyone is paying attention to CDC and local health official guidance. Always are those the kind of things to do. What else would you suggest, Chuck?
Yeah, well, I know that from I think you've covered all of the tactile, shall we say, things to do. Great things you can put in place, low cost, low effort, and you're going to reduce a percentage of illnesses in the workplace if you continue to have employees follow through. The other thing is just be aware of the legal side. If you got 50 or more employees, you could be under FMLA. An employee calls in more than 3 days. You're going to want to get that FMLA paperwork out to them, even if they said, oh, I'll be back in a couple more days. I always got FMLA paperwork out to them. And in fact, John, just a little preview, I think our next episode, we're going to have we have an FMLA question from one of our listeners and that we wanted to answer, but we're going to wait for that one next episode.
That's a little tease. I like it. Let me ask you a question, Chuck, while we're talking about FMLA. If I have a cold, do I fall under FMLA?
Well, you could. Yeah. What do we always say in HR? Perhaps, maybe you could, maybe not. It depends. So if you work for a covered employer, which is 50 or more employees within 75-mile radius, if you have worked there for a year and 1,250 hours, and yes, then if you are out for more than 3 days to protect your job, you may fall under FMLA. It just all depends.
Yeah, it means typically it's a serious health condition, and I am not going to argue that whether an employee's cold is a serious health condition or not, but I would definitely be asking for medical follow-up on that.
Yes.
So, okay, so any final thoughts, Chuck?
No. Well, yes, folks, don't forget to check out our website, team@hrstories.com. team@hrstories.com. We have a number of additional resources that may help you get HR right. Remember to check out our book. It's still fairly new, the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists, the Ultimate Guide to HR Checklists, as we like to call it, because more than a book, and that's hrchecklist.com. And of course, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, what you see, what you hear, because we love bringing these stories to you, and we know that there are thousands of you out there that have downloaded our podcasts and you enjoy these stories.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You have been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.